Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, February 13th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first story today, Trump administration to end surge of immigration agents in Minnesota. The announcement came more than 2 months into an operation that has led to tense protests, thousands of arrests, and 3 shootings in the Democratic-led state. By Ernesto Londoño, Mitch Smith, and Pooja Salhotra. The Trump administration said on Thursday that it was ending its deployment of immigration agents to Minnesota, unwinding an aggressive operation that has stretched for more than 2 months despite loud opposition from residents and local officials. For many Minnesotans who had watched the federal government exert its will on their state, wielding law enforcement power and physical force at a scale that had no modern American precedent, the announcement signaled a welcome shift. Still, some expressed skepticism about whether the administration would follow through. Since the immigration crackdown began late last year, federal agents have shot 3 people in Minnesota, including 2 U.S. citizens who were killed. Officials said agents also arrested more than 4,000 undocumented immigrants in Minnesota, some of whom had been convicted of serious crimes. The deployment of some 3,000 agents, outnumbering the police forces in Minneapolis and St. Paul, led to extraordinary clashes between residents and officers, as well as volleys of recriminations between state and federal leaders. For weeks, protesters trailed federal agents through the streets of the Twin Cities, blowing whistles to alert people to their presence and sometimes angrily confronting them. The agents often traveled in convoys of SUVs with out-of-state license plates, their faces obscured by masks, responded regularly with force and threats of arrest. And while the Democrats who run Minnesota referred to the operation as an illegal occupation, Republicans in Washington accused local officials of obstruction and opened criminal investigations. On Thursday, Tom Homan, the White House border czar, declared the operation a success, saying that a significant drawdown has already been underway this week and will continue to the next week. Mr. Homan said he had made arrangements for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents to have more access to undocumented inmates at county jails in Minnesota, and he described conversations with state officials as productive. He did not immediately provide examples of newfound cooperation on immigration matters from local jurisdictions. As a result of our efforts here, Minnesota is now less of a sanctuary state for criminals, Mr. Homan said. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who described the operation as an unprecedented federal invasion in all aspects of life, said he was cautiously optimistic after the announcement by Mr. Homan. Mr. Walz said there had been no change in state policy on immigration enforcement. The sheriff's office in Hennepin County, which operates the largest jail in the state and does not coordinate with ICE, said on Thursday that its policies had also not changed. They left us with deep damage, generational trauma, Mr. Walz said. They left us with economic ruin in some cases. And many local leaders qualified their relief with suspicion, urging residents not to let down their guard immediately. I'll believe it when I see it, said Elliot Payne, the president of the Minneapolis City Council. The influx of agents to Minnesota, which the administration named Operation Metro Surge, began around December 1st, but it picked up intensely after the new year and the fatal shootings of Renee Good, a poet and mother of 3, and Alex Preddy, an intensive care nurse, set off protests around the country. The Trump administration rushed to cast Ms. Good and Mr. Preddy as domestic terrorists, persisting even when some of its claims were contradicted by videos. Also last month, an agent shot and wounded a Venezuelan man who officials said was in the country illegally and had resisted arrest. Bipartisan concern about the killing of Mr. Preddy, who was shot on January 24th, led to something of a tone shift. Gregory Bovino, the Border Patrol commander who had been leading the crackdown, was removed, and Mr. Homan was dispatched to Minnesota, where he struck a more conciliatory tone and vowed to focus agents' attention on undocumented immigrants with arrests or convictions on their records. On Thursday, Mr. Homan thanked by name some of the Minnesota officials who have been singled out for criticism by others in the Trump administration. He said President Trump has agreed to the decision to wind down the operation. "We've seen a big change here in the last couple of weeks," Mr. Homan said, "and it's all good changes." Some in Minnesota described the operation's end as a victory for the residents who protested and filmed immigration agents even when they faced legal and physical threats. "It's clear that the commitment of our neighbors made it untenable for ICE and federal agents to continue to operate its occupation of our city and state," Jason Chavez, a member of the Minneapolis City Council, wrote in an email to residents. "This isn't as a result of capitulation from elected leaders." Mr. Homan said that the drawdown should not be seen as a sign of the administration changing its stance on immigration enforcement. "President Trump made a promise of mass deportation, and that's what this country is going to get," Mr. Homan said. Even as Mr. Homan and local officials began meeting behind closed doors, the Trump administration remained at odds with Minnesota leaders over policies that limit cooperation on immigration enforcement. Though Minnesota does not have sweeping statewide sanctuary measures for immigrants, federal officials have complained about limited access to immigrants held in county jails and about municipal limits on cooperation in Minneapolis and St. Paul. The Trump administration has repeatedly defended its work in Minnesota as a necessary response to that limited cooperation, as well as to widespread fraud in state welfare programs. State and city leaders filed a lawsuit claiming that the operation was an unconstitutional violation of state sovereignty, but failed to convince a judge to grant an injunction. Minnesota officials have also asked for state officers to be allowed to join federal agents in their investigations into Mr. Preddy and Ms. Good's killings, but have so far been rebuffed. From the beginning of the deployment, residents in the heavily Democratic Twin Cities had formed neighborhood chat groups and started informal patrols to monitor and sometimes confront immigration agents. Federal officials said those protesters had often crossed the line into obstruction or violence, and several of them were charged with federal crimes. Activists accused federal officials of systematically using threats, tear gas, and physical force against nonviolent protesters, and of squelching First Amendment rights. A federal judge briefly imposed restrictions on agents' actions toward protesters last month, but her ruling was blocked by an appellate court. Other lawsuits, which have not been resolved, accused immigration agents of illegally using racial profiling and not providing consistent access to lawyers for people who were detained. The Trump administration has denied those claims. The practical effect of Thursday's announcement remains somewhat unclear. Mr. Homan said last week that he was pulling about 700 agents out of the state. But in the days that followed, many residents and local officials said that immigration agents still seemed to be all around, and that the region still seemed to be enmeshed in the crackdown. Mr. Homan said a small footprint of personnel would remain in Minnesota, while most agents would be sent back to their home bases or to other locations. Mr. Waltz said on Thursday that we are in a trust but verify phase, and he urged residents to stay hypervigilant in the days ahead. He jokingly offered to help departing agents pack their bags. Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis celebrated the end of immigration crackdown and praised how residents had responded. He said the immigration operation had been catastrophic for Minneapolis families and businesses. "They thought they could break us, but a love for our neighbors and a resolve to endure can outlast an occupation," Mr. Frey said in a statement. The operation in Minnesota follows surges of immigration agents last year to cities including Los Angeles and Chicago, also Democratic-led places whose leaders have been at odds with the president. Mr. Homan's announcement on Thursday signaled a shift in strategy and messaging. While federal officials wound down their aggressive operations in Los Angeles and Chicago last year, the administration made no formal announcement that agents were heading out, leaving local and state officials in the dark about their intentions. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump administration erases the government's power to fight climate change. The Environmental Protection Agency rejected the bedrock scientific finding that greenhouse gases threaten human life and well-being. It means the agency can no longer regulate them. by Lisa Friedman. President Trump on Thursday announced he was erasing the scientific finding that climate change endangers human health and the environment, ending the federal government's legal authority to control the pollution that is dangerously heating the planet. The action is a key step in removing limits on carbon dioxide, methane, and 4 other greenhouse gases that scientists say are supercharging heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and other extreme weather. Led by a president who refers to climate change as a hoax, the administration is essentially saying that the vast majority of scientists around the world are wrong, and that a hotter planet is not the menace that decades of research shows it to be. It's a rejection of fact that has been accepted for decades by presidents of both parties, including Richard Nixon, whose top advisor warned of the dangers of climate change, and the first president, George Bush, who signed an international climate treaty. And it is a knockout punch in the years-long fight by a small group of conservative activists, as well as oil, gas, and coal interests, to stop the country from transitioning away from fossil fuels and toward solar, wind, and other non-polluting energy. This is about as big as it gets, President Trump said at the White House as a smiling Lee Zeldin, the administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, stood by. We are officially terminating the so-called endangerment finding, a disastrous Obama-era policy, he said. Mr. Trump called it a radical rule that became the basis for the Green New Scam, a label the president gives to any effort to curb emissions or develop renewable energy. Mr. Zeldin called it the single largest deregulatory action in the history of the United States. He accused Democrats of having launched an ideological crusade on climate change that strangled entire sectors of the United States economy, particularly the auto industry. The administration claimed it would save auto manufacturers and other businesses an estimated $1 trillion, although it has declined to explain how it arrived at that estimate. At issue is what's known as the endangerment finding, a 2009 scientific conclusion that greenhouse gas emissions pose a danger to Americans' health and welfare. The finding was based on more than 200 pages of research and evidence. Mr. Trump, who has called climate scientists stupid people, claimed on Thursday that the finding had no basis in fact. For nearly 17 years, the EPA had relied on the bedrock finding to justify regulations that limit carbon dioxide, methane, and other pollution from oil and gas wells, tailpipes, smokestacks, and other sources that burn fossil fuels. The repeal of the endangerment finding is expected to increase the country's greenhouse gas emissions by 10% over the next 30 years, according to the Environmental Defense Fund, an advocacy group. The added pollution could lead to as many as 58,000 premature deaths and an increase of 37 million asthma attacks between now and 2055, the group said. But on Fox Business on Wednesday, Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary, revived a debunked myth to sum up how the Trump administration views carbon dioxide, the main greenhouse gas. CO2 was never a pollutant, he said. When we breathe, we emit CO2. Plants need CO2 to survive and grow. They thrive with more CO2. While carbon dioxide can help plants grow, the extraordinarily high levels in the atmosphere are overwhelming natural processes and increasing the frequency and severity of drought, heat waves, and other damaging events, according to scientists. Governor Gavin Newsom of California promised a court challenge. If this reckless decision survives legal challenges, it will lead to more deadly wildfires, more extreme heat deaths, more climate-driven floods and droughts, and greater threats to communities nationwide, he said. California will sue to challenge this legal action and will continue to regulate greenhouse gases, he said. We will see them in court and we will win, said Manish Bapna, the president of the Natural Resources Defense Council. The science and the law are crystal clear, and EPA is issuing a rushed, sloppy, and unscientific determination that has no legal basis. In revoking the endangerment finding, the Trump administration made the legal argument that the Clean Air Act allows the government to limit only pollution that causes direct harm to Americans, and only in cases where the damage is near the source of the pollution. Greenhouse gases, however, collect in the atmosphere where they form a kind of blanket around the Earth, trapping heat from the sun. That is altering the Earth's climate and intensifying heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and floods, while also melting glaciers, causing sea levels to rise. The planet has warmed, on average, about 1.4 degrees Celsius, or 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, since the Industrial Age, according to Europe's Copernicus Climate Change Service. The action announced on Thursday eliminates limits on greenhouse gases produced by motor vehicles. Transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gases in the United States. The Biden administration had sought to tighten limits on tailpipe emissions to encourage automakers to sell more non-polluting electric vehicles. Restrictions on other pollutants from automobiles, such as nitrogen oxide and benzene, are still in place. Getting rid of the endangerment finding clears the way for the EPA to repeal limits on greenhouse gases from stationary sources of pollution, such as power plants and oil and gas wells, a process that it has begun. The United States is currently the world's second largest climate polluter after China, but is the nation that has pumped the most greenhouse gases into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. That distinction matters because past emissions of long-lived greenhouse gases significantly contribute to current warming. Numerous rigorous scientific findings since 2009 have showed that greenhouse gases and global warming are harming public health and directly causing deaths. Recent research has found that if the planet continues to warm at its current rate, exposure to wildfire smoke would kill an estimated 70,000 Americans each year by 2050. Just one example of the health dangers posed by a heating planet. Another study found that deaths from extreme heat in the United States have more than doubled in recent decades. As the weather globally gets warmer and wetter, disease is spreading. Last year, 4,947 travelers from the United States contracted dengue, a mosquito-borne disease prevalent in tropical and subtropical climates, while abroad, a 30% increase over the previous year, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, nearly all nations agreed to try to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels. That goal has been seen as crucial to avoiding the worst effects of climate change. Scientists now expect the Earth to warm by an average of around 2.6 degrees Celsius, or 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit, by the end of the century. Mr. Trump has withdrawn the United States from the Paris Agreement, making it the only nation among the nearly 200 to do so. He also pulled the country out of the underlying United Nations Climate Treaty and a Nobel Prize-winning group made up of the world's leading climate scientists. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, both Democrats, said the EPA had abandoned its responsibility to protect public health and the environment. This shameful abdication, an economic, moral, and political failure, will harm Americans' health, homes, and economic well-being, they said in a statement. It ignores scientific fact and common-sense observations to serve big political donors. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican of West Virginia, where coal remains a key component of the economy, was one of a handful of lawmakers to publicly praise Mr. Trump's decision. President Trump, whose 2024 campaign got a boost of as much as $450 million from the oil and gas industry, has worked to make it cheaper and easier to keep burning fossil fuels while throttling efforts to build cleaner energy sources such as solar and wind. Reversing the endangerment finding has been seen as the holy grail for those who deny the science of climate change. That's because if the repeal is upheld in court, it could also prevent future administrations from restoring regulations to curb greenhouse gases. Mr. Zeldin and other administration officials said the endangerment finding has been a drag on the economy. They argued that requiring the EPA to tackle climate change harmed consumer choice by limiting the types of automobiles available for purchase. Some business groups supported the administration's actions, but others were silent or muted in their response. That's because trade groups that once opposed the endangerment finding, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, have in recent years acknowledged the scientific reality of climate change. John Bozzella, president of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which represents most automakers, declined to say whether he supported the move, But he said in a statement that the automobile emission standards imposed by the Biden administration were extremely challenging for automakers to achieve given the current marketplace demand. Other industry officials said the EPA move would hurt electric vehicle manufacturing. Rescinding the endangerment finding pulls the rug out from companies that have invested in manufacturing next-gen vehicles across the United States. Albert Gore, the director of the Zero Emissions Transportation Association, a trade group, said in a statement that this takes place following a record year of global sales of these vehicles shows a clear disconnect between Washington and the market, Mr. Gore said. Several business trade groups told the EPA that they were concerned about the legal implications of the agency's proposal. They said they worried that some states would enact stricter greenhouse gas policies in response, forcing companies to respond to a patchwork of laws in different parts of the country. Mike Summers, the president of the American Petroleum Institute, which represents oil and gas companies, said the industry wants to end the regulations that apply to automobiles, but that the government should continue to limit carbon dioxide as well as methane emissions from power plants and oil and gas wells. Most of the major oil and gas companies had already invested millions of dollars in pollution controls. One of the reasons why we shouldn't support that is because we do support the federal regulation of methane, and we're focused on reducing our emissions as an industry, Mr. Summers said in a recent call with journalists. The drive to repeal the endangerment finding began well before President Trump was reelected to the White House. It was an objective in Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for overhauling the federal government. The endangerment finding has been abused by the EPA to justify regulations that do not comport with the Clean Air Act, said Thomas J. Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance, a conservative research group that promotes fossil fuel energy. If Congress thinks the EPA should regulate CO2 as a pollutant, they should say so affirmatively in law so that EPA has a clear mandate. In disregarding the endangerment finding, Lee Zeldin is reversing positions he took as a member of Congress from Long Island from 2019 to 2023. During that time, he voted several times to address climate change, including a vote against an amendment to a spending bill that would have prohibited the EPA from applying the endangerment finding. He even joined the Climate Solutions Caucus, a bipartisan group of House members. In 2022, he ran unsuccessfully for governor of New York on a pledge to allow and accelerate natural gas drilling. After becoming Mr. Trump's EPA administrator, Mr. Zeldin ridiculed climate change and said he hoped to drive a dagger through it by repealing the endangerment finding. New York City officials reinstate pride flag at Stonewall after federal removal. Hundreds of people attended a rally on Thursday to re-raise the flag, setting up a defiant response to the Trump administration's assault on diversity initiatives. By Liam Stack and Olivia Ben-Simon. A group of New York elected officials gathered on Thursday to replace the pride flag that was removed from the Stonewall National Monument after a directive from the Trump administration, mounting a defiant response to the government's assault on diversity initiatives at a federal site honoring the LGBTQ rights movement. The plan to re-raise the flag in the center of the small park outside the historic Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village had been widely publicized on social media, and hundreds of spectators cheered as its rainbow colors made their way back up the flagpole under a cloudy winter sky. "We have brought the flag back to a sacred site," Brad Hoylman-Siegel, the Manhattan Borough president, told the crowd through a bullhorn. The pride flag had been removed after the Department of the Interior issued federal guidance that addressed the display of non-agency flags in the national park system. It was not clear exactly when the flag was taken down, but employees of the Stonewall Inn said they noticed it was gone on Monday morning. On Wednesday afternoon, federal employees raised an American flag on the pole where the pride flag had once flown. By sunset on Thursday, both flags were waving side by side. Mariah Lopez, a transgender activist, said the rainbow flag's unauthorized return was in keeping with the history of the monument, which commemorates 3 days of protests and street clashes between LGBTQ activists and the police after a June 1969 police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar on Christopher Street. Nearby, Timothy French, 47, a drag performer from the Bronx who uses gender-neutral pronouns, said the return of the flag had made them feel emotional. They said they had recently been assaulted on the subway and had a transgender friend who was hospitalized after an attack. But to see so many LGBTQ people standing together united made the heaviness of those incidents feel momentarily far away. It was not clear how long the newly raised rainbow flag would be allowed to remain at the site, which is under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. The flag's quiet disappearance was met with outrage from elected officials and many New Yorkers earlier this week. At a news conference on Thursday, Julie Menine, the city council speaker, criticized the secretive way the flag appeared to have been removed, saying it was taken in the middle of the night. There was no discussion, she said on Thursday. There was no warning. It was taken. When asked this week about the removal, the National Park Service pointed to a federal memo, which was issued on January 21st. The agency said in a statement that only the U.S. flag and other congressionally or departmentally authorized flags are flown on NPS-managed flagpoles, with limited exceptions. Any change to flag displays are made to ensure consistency with that guidance, it added. The agency said it continued to preserve the historic significance of the Stonewall National Monument through exhibits and programs. On Thursday, Ms. Menine said she and other lawmakers had sent a letter to the National Park Service demanding the return of the flag. The council also approved a resolution that called on the federal government to respect the significance of historical sites like Stonewall. The Stonewall National Monument was designated in 2016 by former President Barack Obama. The 7.7-acre site encompasses the Stonewall Inn, Christopher Park, and several nearby streets and sidewalks. The site has become well known around the world, and LGBTQ events and organizations in several countries, including Britain, Australia, and Germany, have been named in its honor. The original Pride flag debuted in 1978, according to the Park Service's website, with each of its 8 colors symbolizing an aspect of the LGBTQ community's experience. Since President Trump's inauguration last year, his administration has mounted a broad assault on what it views as diversity initiatives and has frequently enlisted the National Park Service to police the language used or the symbols displayed at public sites. In the last year, the Park Service has removed an exhibit on George Washington's ownership of slaves from Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, dismantled a plaque about climate change at the Muir Woods National Monument in California, and stopped showing films about immigrant and female textile workers at Lowell National Historic Park in Massachusetts. The administration also ordered Pride flags to be removed from American sites overseas through a State Department directive issued last year that said only American flags could be flown at U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide. That represented a shift from the Biden administration, which at times displayed Pride and Black Lives Matter flags. The removal of the Pride flag was the second time in the last 12 months that President Trump has targeted Stonewall, which is the first historic site in the United States dedicated to the nation's LGBTQ rights movement. Soon after Mr. Trump's inauguration, the Park Service removed the word transgender from prominent sections of the monument's website as part of the administration's push against diversity initiatives. That move prompted hundreds of people to gather in Greenwich Village to protest what they saw as an attack on the symbolic heart of the gay rights movement. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, State Assemblywoman Deborah Glick described the Trump administration as petty, mean-spirited, and cruel regime that had at its heart hatred and a desire to divide people. This is just one symbol of their attempt to tell a community that they are going to come after us and chase us into the shadows, said Ms. Glick, who is the first openly gay member of the state legislature. We are not going back. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. House votes to cancel Trump's Canada tariffs. 6 Republicans joined nearly all Democrats to end the national emergency President Donald Trump has declared to impose tariffs on imports from Canada. By Robert Jimison. The House voted on Wednesday to rescind tariffs that President Trump imposed on Canada last year, delivering a largely symbolic but politically consequential rebuke that Republicans had fought for a year to prevent. In a 219 to 211 vote, 6 Republicans joined nearly all Democrats in backing the resolution sponsored by Representative Gregory W. Meeks of New York, the top Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Committee. While the Senate has moved to cancel the president's tariffs in recent months, the vote was the House's first opportunity to formally register a position on Mr. Trump's trade policy since he returned to the White House and began deploying tariffs as an economic strategy. Despite succeeding in the House, the measure is unlikely to have any practical effect, given that Mr. Trump would almost certainly veto it. Still, its movement through the House reflects frustration among some GOP lawmakers about Congress continuing to cede its authority over trade matters to the White House, and concern that voters are being hurt by the levies. There is not a national emergency, Mr. Meeks declared from the House floor while urging his colleagues to support the resolution. He and other Democrats argued that Mr. Trump's signature economic policy was not a strategy but an impulse. For the last year, House Republican leaders have shielded their members from being forced to vote on the issue by manipulating the definition of a day in Congress to prevent challenges from maturing. But they failed this week to muster the support in their own ranks to push it off once more. The result was that scores of Republicans, including those facing potentially difficult re-election fights, went on the record backing tariffs that some of their constituents fear could be disastrous. Last February, Mr. Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to declare a national security emergency and impose tariffs of 25% on all imports from Canada and Mexico, as well as 10% on products from China. He cited border security failures tied to drug trafficking and illegal migration. Republicans argued that those aims justified the president's emergency declaration. Representative Brian Mast of Florida, the Republican chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, said during a speech that this is not a debate about tariffs or about the president's authority, but about curbing the flow of illicit drugs into the United States. They don't see any of it as a national emergency, Mr. Mast said of Democrats who pushed the resolution. But while fentanyl has flooded North America's drug supply over the past decade, killing tens of thousands of people in the United States and Canada, less than 0.1% of the fentanyl arriving in the United States in 2023 came from Canada, according to data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. For decades, Republicans opposed tariffs and promoted free trade and open markets, but under Mr. Trump, they have largely acquiesced to his protectionist policies. Representatives Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Don Bacon of Nebraska, Kevin Kiley of California, Jeff Hurd of Colorado, Dan Newhouse of Washington, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania were the Republicans who broke ranks to support the resolution's passage. Representative Jared Golden of Maine was the only Democrat to vote against the resolution. As the vote was unfolding and Republicans neared defeat, Mr. Trump took to social media to threaten those who objected to his authority. Any Republican in the House or Senate that votes against tariffs will seriously suffer the consequences come election time, and that includes primaries, he wrote on his social media site, arguing that the policy had been beneficial to the economy. He added that no Republican should be responsible for destroying this privilege. While a handful of Republicans joined Democrats' challenges to Mr. Trump's approach, the defections fall far short of the two-thirds majority needed in both chambers to override a veto. Still, after successfully passing the resolution targeting the emergency declaration used to justify the Canadian tariffs, Democrats hope to have similar success with challenges they have queued up to the global tariffs Mr. Trump issued in April, as well as those he imposed on Mexico, China, and Brazil. A similar set of resolutions passed the Senate in October, when 3 Republicans joined all Democrats in backing legislation challenging the president's emergency-based tariff authority. Even after his own members dealt him a stinging defeat on the House floor on the matter on Tuesday night, Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, argued that Congress has no business intervening in Mr. Trump's trade policy. The tariffs have been a tool that the president has used very effectively to level the playing field and put America back on top, and I think it's wrong for Congress to step in the middle of that, Mr. Johnson said Wednesday morning in an interview on Fox Business. He noted that ultimately the question of the president's power could be determined by the Supreme Court, which heard oral arguments in November on a case challenging the legality of Mr. Trump's tariffs. 6 companies in several states have argued that the president exceeded his authority by using the emergency statute to impose them on nearly every U.S. trading partner. During oral arguments, key members of the court's conservative majority joined liberal justices in sharply questioning the administration's assertion that it has the power to unilaterally impose tariffs without congressional approval. Several justices also noted that Mr. Trump was the first president to claim that the decades-old emergency statute authorized tariffs. The debate in Congress and action in the court are unfolding as lawmakers stare down midterm election races in which the economy and affordability could be key issues. Mr. Trump's tariffs have not been as damaging to the U.S. economy as many economists had feared, largely because the administration delayed and scaled many of them back or offered exemptions for certain imports. While Mr. Trump insists that the tariffs are making the United States rich and giving him substantial leverage against America's trading partners, the impact on the U.S. economy has been mixed. The tariffs did give the United States a significant revenue boost, with customs duties, taxes, and fees rising to approximately $287 billion last year. That was nearly triple the 2024 total. The U.S. trade deficit, a metric that matters a lot to Mr. Trump, also declined sharply last year, falling to its lowest level since 2009 in October. However, the manufacturing boom that Mr. Trump has promised has yet to materialize. Factory construction has been slow, and producers of cars and other machinery have been hit by higher costs of metals. Ukrainian Olympian is disqualified over helmet honoring war dead. Olympic officials ruled that Vladislav Hrashkevich's helmet violated a prohibition on political speech, setting off outrage at the Winter Games in Italy. He plans to appeal the decision. By Heather Knight and Tariq Panja. A Ukrainian athlete was disqualified from the Winter Olympics on Thursday over his plans to wear a helmet honoring countrymen killed in the war with Russia, a decision that drew outrage and touched off the biggest crisis of the Games in Italy. Olympic officials had told the athlete, Vladislav Hrashkevich, that the helmet violated the Games' prohibition on political speech. Mr. Hrashkevich, who competes in skeleton, a sledding event on an ice track, had said this week that he planned to race with it anyway. Moments before the competition on Thursday morning, Mr. Hrashkevich held talks at the track in Cortina d'Ampezzo with the president of the International Olympic Committee, Kirsty Coventry. The meeting ended with Mr. Hrashkevich barred from competing and Ms. Coventry and the athlete's father both in tears after a failure to reach a compromise. I felt that it was really important to come and talk to him face-to-face, Ms. Coventry, who is presiding over her first Olympic Games, told reporters after the meeting. Ms. Coventry's direct and personal intervention underscored the stakes of a dispute that reverberated from Cortina to Milan, where the IOC leadership is based during the Games, and all the way to Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelensky praised Mr. Hrashkevich's courage and denounced Olympic officials for playing into the hands of aggressors. His helmet, bearing the portraits of fallen Ukrainian athletes, is about honor and remembrance, Mr. Zelensky wrote in a social media post. It is a reminder to the whole world of what Russian aggression is and the cost of fighting for independence. During a news conference on Thursday night at the Ukrainian consulate in Milan, Mr. Hrashkevich said he had a hearing to appeal the decision on Friday. Speaking to reporters in Cortina early in the day, he insisted that he had not broken any rules. "There are things more important than medals," he said. "I stood up for what I believe in." The IOC said that it had no choice but to disqualify Mr. Hrashkevich in order to preserve what its spokesman, Mark Adams, described as the sanctity of the field of play. In the view of Olympic officials, the athlete's helmet, featuring portraits of 21 Ukrainian athletes killed in Russian attacks, some of whom were his friends, violated a prohibition against political messages during competitions. In 2020, Olympic officials loosened the rules to allow athletes to make some forms of political statements during the Games on social media or to journalists, but not while competing or on the medal stand. Mr. Hrashkevich had worn what he called his remembrance helmet during practice runs this week, but a clash had loomed for days over his use of it in the competition. Mr. Adams said at a daily news conference on Thursday that the IOC had offered concessions to Mr. Hraskovich, including allowing him to wear a black armband to honor the fallen athletes and permitting him to bring his helmet into the post-race media zone. The athlete refused those offers. Mr. Adams said the IOC's rules must remain in place for the Games not to descend into chaos, given other conflicts around the world. If everyone wanted to express themselves in that way beyond a black armband, it would create a field of play which becomes a field of expression, he said. But some critics accused Olympic officials of hypocrisy. Though the IOC has portrayed the war in Ukraine as one of many conflicts, Russia's Olympic Committee is the only one formally suspended from Olympic competition. That ban came into effect in 2022 after the Russian committee absorbed official sporting bodies in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine. Mr. Hraskovich, who was Ukraine's flag bearer at the opening ceremonies last week, will be allowed to remain at the Olympics in Italy, even though he is no longer eligible to compete, the IOC said. He had ranked 6th in the 25-man skeleton field after training runs this week, putting him in medal contention, and his disqualification loomed over the start of the event on Thursday. Mr. Hraskovich has argued that his tribute was no different from those that other athletes have displayed at the Games, including the American Maxim Naumov, who held up a photo of his parents after his figure skating competition Tuesday. Mr. Naumov's parents were among the 67 people killed in a mid-air collision over Washington, D.C. just over a year ago. This is the second Olympics at which Mr. Hraskovich has sought to bring attention to the situation in Ukraine. At the Beijing Winter Games in 2022, with Russian forces massed near Ukraine's borders and an invasion looming, he held up a sign after his final run that read, "No war in Ukraine." Ukrainian officials and other athletes have expressed support for Mr. Hraskovich. At the conclusion of the luge team relay on Thursday night, members of the Ukrainian team took one knee and raised their helmets in solidarity with their disqualified countrymen. Some of them were crying. On Tuesday, Olena Smaha, a Ukrainian who competes in luge, wore a message on her glove during her competition that said, "Remembrance is not a violation." Ivo Steinbergs, the coach of the Latvian skeleton team, had prepared a protest letter and was encouraging other teams to sign it. The letter demands Mr. Hrascovich's reinstatement and a clearer distinction from the IOC between a memorial tribute and political advocacy. Mr. Steinbergs said it was crushing to have seen Ms. Coventry and other officials call Mr. Hraskovich into a meeting before the first heat of the competition on Thursday morning, then to see him emerge with a disqualification letter and his father next to him in tears. And that was the end of his Olympics, Mr. Steinberg said. He was going for this for 12 years, and they just stole it from him. Tom Johansson, the coach of the Danish skeleton team, said it was unfair to expect an athlete from Ukraine to put the war out of his mind at the Olympics and just act like a robot. His son, Rasmus Vestergaard Johansson, a racer who called Mr. Hraskovich a friend, said he is representing young people who died way too early, and I don't think any athlete, any people, should go through what Ukraine and what Vlad have gone through. Before being elected to lead the IOC last year, Ms. Coventry, who won 2 gold medals in swimming for Zimbabwe, had been part of a group of athletes that helped the organization create its current rules on athlete expression. In her first year as president of the organization, the IOC has tried to draw a firm distinction between sports and politics, with Ms. Coventry insisting that sports must be a neutral ground. But in Italy, the IOC has faced questions over the presence of some Russian athletes at the Games, competing under neutral status. And on the day of the opening ceremonies, a protest broke out in Milan over the presence of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement personnel on a State Department security team for the Games. Fans lamented Mr. Hrascovich's disqualification. A Ukrainian family draped in the country's blue and yellow flag walked the main drag of Cortina on Thursday morning, calling the IOC's decision unfair. It's discrimination, said Natalia Tverdoklib, 44, who lives with her family in Germany, and had come to Cortina hoping to see Mr. Hraskovich compete. His helmet wasn't political, it showed respect for the athletes who died. Her daughter, Maria, 15, said that when they learned he had been barred from competing, they decided not to buy tickets and walked around Cortina instead. They were heartbroken, she said, but really proud of him. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In Munich, Europe's leaders wonder if they can ever trust America again. Officials gather on Friday for Europe's biggest annual security summit, where a speech by Vice President J.D. Vance last year started an unraveling of transatlantic relations. By Stephen Erlanger and Jim Tankersley. When Vice President J.D. Vance told the Munich Security Conference last year that America's European allies were destroying themselves with immigration and unfairly barring the far right from power, it was a shock to the transatlantic alliance. There was much more to come. In the year that followed, President Trump imposed tariffs on European goods. He pushed to end the war in Ukraine on terms largely favorable to President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia and threatened to pry Greenland from Denmark by any means necessary. He mocked European leaders in a bullying speech in Switzerland, declaring Europe would be nothing without the United States. It has been a dizzying unraveling of the friendship that bound the West together for 3/4 of a century since World War II. That has left European leaders more wary, and in some cases more defiant, toward America as they prepared to meet again in Munich starting Friday for Europe's largest annual gathering of politicians and security officials. Diplomats and heads of state across the continent say they no longer expect relations with America to revert to a pre-Trump normal, even after Mr. Trump leaves office. They have accelerated efforts to reduce their military and economic dependence on the United States, even as they continue to court the president with flattery in an effort to maintain influence with him on Ukraine and other global issues. Transatlantic relations have changed, and no one in this room says this with more regret than I do. Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, who will open the Munich conference with a speech, said last week, but nostalgia and reminiscing about bygone better times won't help us. The question on many Europeans' minds is whether they can ever really trust the United States again, and what they need to do if they cannot. Of course, we've had a serious loss of trust, no doubt about it, Wolfgang Ischinger, the chairman of the Security Conference, said in an interview. Of course, trust can be rebuilt, but we all know losing trust is easier than rebuilding it. In a report before the gathering, staff at the Security Conference called Mr. Trump a wrecking ball and one of the demolition men destroying the norms and institutions of the international order. Last month, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen of Denmark questioned how long America would remain a European ally. Administration officials do not see it that way. They say Mr. Trump is pushing Europe to be a stronger, more self-sufficient partner after decades of relying on American troops and nuclear weapons to ensure their national security. Matthew Whitaker, the American ambassador to NATO, suggested in Berlin this week that the administration viewed Europe as a child that had grown up and needed to find a job. We're not asking for European autonomy, he said. We're asking for European strength. Europeans, though, are talking about Mr. Trump in terms that are more resigned and more urgent than a year ago. At the time, when Mr. Vance stunned the Munich crowd, which had been expecting to hear about Mr. Trump's plan to swiftly end the war in Ukraine, European leaders tried to rebut him. "This is unacceptable," Boris Pistorius, Germany's defense minister, shouted from the audience as Mr. Vance spoke. He later singled out the vice president from the Munich stage. If I understood him correctly, he is comparing conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes, Mr. Pistorius said. This is not the Europe and not the democracy in which I live. Weeks later, Europeans watched as Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance berated President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine in the Oval Office. In December, they read the White House's updated national security strategy, which warned that Europe faced civilizational erasure, echoing language from far-right European political parties. Natalie Tocci, the director of the Institute of International Affairs, a research group in Rome, said those events and Mr. Vance's Munich speech were clarifying. Those 3 months indicated that we're not in a ballgame of a disentanglement, disengagement, detachment, or even abandonment, she said, but we're really in a scenario of betrayal. Europeans have questioned Mr. Trump's strategy of scorning Europe when America needs their support to compete against Russia and China. Jan Techau, a former German defense official and an analyst at the Eurasia Group, said it's just absolute folly to throw away an empire and to throw away your best allies, to alienate them at a time when you need them. Europe's leaders have often sought to mollify Mr. Trump by flattering his ego and giving him small wins. They pledged to increase military spending within NATO, one of Mr. Trump's longtime goals. They called Mr. Trump the only leader in the world who could broker peace in Ukraine, in an effort to steer him away from Mr. Putin's influence. They cut a hasty deal to limit the damage from Mr. Trump's threatened tariffs. Last month, they promised to bolster NATO's defense of the Arctic in an apparent handshake deal to stall Mr. Trump's attempts to take Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally. The Greenland crisis seems to have brought Europe to the acceptance phase of its grief, understanding that the traditional reliance and dependence on the United States is no longer possible or even strategically wise, said Ivo H. Dalder, a former American ambassador to NATO. Europe cannot trust America today and cannot trust America tomorrow unless and until the U.S. engages in behavior designed to regain that trust, Mr. Dalder said. And it's possible, if not probable, that Europe will never trust us again. The nature of the relationship between the U.S. and Europe will never go back to where it was. The European public appears to think in similar terms. The latest Cluster 17 survey of 7,498 people from 7 European countries, conducted in January for Le Grand Continent, a French journal, was startling. A large majority backed sending European troops to defend Greenland if tensions there escalate. 51% said Mr. Trump was an enemy of Europe. Only 8% called him a friend. Most European leaders still say the transatlantic alliance needs preserving. German officials suggested this week that Mr. Merz would use his Munich speech to build out a new vision for Europe's role in the partnership, one that rests on increased military spending, stronger economic growth, and deepened ties with other partners like India, Africa, and Middle Eastern countries. Mr. Ischinger, the chairman of the Munich conference, said he hoped it would begin 2 processes: repairing the U.S.-Europe relationship and pushing Europe to act concretely to reduce its dependencies on America. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the highest-ranking American official set to attend the conference, is scheduled to speak on Saturday morning. Officials across Europe were not certain this week what he would say. It was not clear if Mr. Rubio planned to meet at the conference with representatives from the far-right Alternative for Germany Party, or AfD, who were invited after being frozen out of recent conferences. Several European officials said privately they did not expect a shock from the more emollient Mr. Rubio, on par with Mr. Vance last year, but these days they could not rule it out. Mr. Rubio is scheduled to travel from Munich to Hungary and Slovakia, 2 countries led by populist parties that are sharply critical of the European Union and close to Russia. Would you leave your bag unattended at a Starbucks? They did, for hours. It is common for people to leave their belongings when they step away in South Korea, but some customers created a minor furor by occupying seats at a store without physically being there. By Jin Yu Young. A group of flight attendants walked into a Starbucks in Seoul on Monday and set down their bags, taking over nearly all the seating in the coffee shop. They ordered their drinks, picked them up, and then left without taking their belongings. They returned hours later and retrieved their bags, which had remained untouched. It was the 4th or 5th time this chain of events had occurred at the store in recent days, a Starbucks employee said. Eventually, some other customers, looking for a spot to sit, walked out because there was no room. The commotion, minor as it was, made it to local news media on Tuesday. One report on YouTube got more than 1 million views, with many viewers leaving comments criticizing the airline employees for claiming space for hours without actually using it. The comments were devoid of any concern over the safety of the bags themselves. This is the culture in South Korea, where low crime rates and high surveillance rates have contributed to a sense of trust and safety in public spaces. It is common for South Koreans to leave their personal belongings to claim seats in public places like cafes and restaurants. During lunch hour on Wednesday in downtown Seoul, nearly 20 cafes had at least one table strewn with unattended items. A Gucci bag was left on a chair near the entrance of one. A black Marni purse was on top of a table that faced the window in another. Smartphones, laptops, and jackets were scattered across seats in others. South Korea relies heavily on video cameras to monitor public spaces. Since 2008, the nation has drastically increased the number of CCTV cameras in public places from less than 200,000 to nearly 2 million in 2024, according to government data. The number of thefts has decreased by a third in the past decade, government data show, even as other problems such as cybercrime have increased. Kim Lee-jung, an office worker in Seoul, said he often leaves his belongings to mark his seat when he goes to coffee shops. The thought of having my stuff stolen has never occurred to me, he said. It feels natural to just leave it. Like many cafes and restaurants in South Korea, Starbucks does not prohibit customers from leaving their personal belongings in their seats, but has in the past restricted the use of large items like desktop monitors and printers. Its staff has the authority to ask customers to leave if they are disturbing others. That was the case with the flight attendants, who were asked to leave because their bags were turning other customers away, according to the company. We apologize for inconveniencing Starbucks and the other customers, Asiana Airlines, which the flight attendants worked for, said in a statement. An airline spokeswoman said the flight attendants had left the cafe to attend visa interviews required for work at the nearby U.S. Embassy, where large bags are prohibited. The Starbucks store in question, in Gwanghwamun Square, was not very busy when a reporter visited it on Thursday morning. South Koreans may have traded a bit of privacy for increased safety, but that's why the country is incredibly safe, said Han Min-kyung, a criminology professor at Korean National Police University. Women can walk outside at night without having to fear major crime, she said. I wonder in how many countries we can do that. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, February 13th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.